Okay, now in this lesson here, we're going to cover the characteristics of manufacturing and service businesses. Okay, and taking our dot points from the study design, so this one specifically, we're going to cover the characteristics of operations management within a manufacturing and service business. Okay, so we're going to look at manufacturing businesses, what's the features, the characteristics of those, the same for services, and then we're going to compare the two together. Okay, so now hopefully you enjoyed that little video of the Cadbury bunnies just being made ready for Easter and moving down the production line and the Easter eggs. One of my favourite times of the year. But clearly Cadbury is a manufacturing business making a tangible product. The chocolate egg, the chocolate bunny that comes from that. So first of all, we're going to look at manufacturing businesses. So obviously Cadbury is a great example, making chocolate bars, but also you can think of any major car manufacturer, whether it be Ford, Nissan, Toyota, Mercedes, Rolls-Royce, whatever may be your personal preference, but we're making goods. Okay, so the manufacturing businesses, what are those key characteristics? So we're going to take them in turn down the side here. Okay, first of all, this word called tangibility. We've mentioned it already, whether things are tangible or intangible. Can we touch them or do we experience them in the ether? Well, clearly, manufacturing goods are tangible. We can see and touch the chocolate bar. We can see and touch the car. The next thing, if we break down these characteristics, let's think about the production and consumption of these products that we're making here. What's the pattern here? Well, imagine when we produce the chocolate bar, we can then store it on the shelves for a whole period of time before someone eventually consumes it. It doesn't happen at the same time. The same for the car. Production and consumption occur separately. They make the car, they store the car, they get it to the retail store. You then purchase it off the front of the car lot. Okay, so there's a difference there between the two. So this production and consumption occur separately. Another feature here, storability. Things like chocolate bars and cars can be stored for a long time. So often the output from a manufacturing business is easily stored. Let's think about making the item, whether it be the chocolate bar or the car. Okay. Here we have an opportunity to standardize or sometimes called mass produce this item. We can make a whole bunch of the same chocolate Easter eggs. Okay, we can make a whole bunch of the same type of chocolate bars. We can make a whole batch of cars at the same time. They look the same, they are the same because we've used those production processes. So that word standardize refers to things that are consistently produced and are virtually identical to one another. Now, we don't have to do all of that in manufacturing. We might make manufacturing one-offs. We might do unique ones, but we will see the difference in a minute when we get to services. Okay, so we can standardize and mass produce some of these items if we want to in a manufacturing business. The next one. Where do we see the customers as we're making these products? Well, we don't really see them around at all. They're waiting at the end. Okay, after we've produced the product and it moves down the production line, then they're waiting at the end to consume the products. So we have minimal customer contact during that production. So as we're making the chocolate bars, it moves down the production line. As we're making the car, we're not seeing the customer around. The customer occurs later. And in terms of production, well, we can use a lot of capital-intensive production if we want to, okay? Why? Because often we can use a standardized process. So we're having production lines making identical products, standardized, if we're doing that. Well, then we can invest a lot in capital-intensive. Remember the word capital? Is referring to the technology. It's referring to the machinery that we're building there. So capital intensive is when we use a high degree of machinery and equipment during that production process. So there's an opportunity to do that in manufacturing. Okay, so we've covered manufacturing businesses. Now let's have a look at service businesses. What are the characteristics of those? And then in a minute, we're going to be able to see what are the difference from manufacturing ones. Okay, so let's take the same characteristics and let's look in this example here, a service like Australia Post, delivering our letters to our door. That's a service they're providing for us. Or in this case here, Qantas, giving us a service, taking us on our holidays, flying us to our destination. So firstly, let's look at tangibility. Can we touch it? Can we physically touch it? Well, the postal service itself is just arriving. Yes, of course, we can touch the letter, but the actual delivery is just occurring, okay? So that we've made the parcel, it's been delivered to your door. We can't touch that delivery. It's just occurring at our doorstep. In the same way, that experience we feel when we're on the flight, when we're receiving the entertainment or we're experiencing the warmth of being welcomed by the service personnel on the plane, we're just experiencing that. Whether we're getting turbulence on the flight, we're experiencing that. So it's an experience which is usually therefore intangible. So usually we can't touch these. What about that production and consumption pattern? Well, if you remember in manufacturing, we make the product and then usually we experience it as a customer later on. Here, we're experiencing it at the same time. So when we're having that flight, when we're having the stewards and the stewardesses giving us our meal and allowing us to have our entertainment and hopefully the pilots having a safe, non-turbulent flight, then we're experiencing it. We're there right at the same time. So that production of that service and our consumption is occurring simultaneously. We're having that at the same time as it's being made for us or given to us. So therefore, inevitably, that experience is very hard to store. We're experiencing right there and then when we're on that flight. Okay, you can't bottle up that experience and then give it to people later. Very hard to do that. Here, it's experienced just as we're receiving that service. And because it's very individual, the service that I want on the flight, whether I want the water or I want the chicken or the beef, or whether I want to have a different movie to someone else, it's very customized to me. So often there's a chance to have not standardized like we had in manufacturing, but a customized service for that individual customer. Again, because we've got the customer right there, we're going to have a high degree of customer contact. Them experiencing the flight, them receiving the package, they're involved with it. Okay, so the customer contact is occurring right there. And because it's about people, this can often be more labor intensive. So we thought about before about making a chocolate bar, can be often very capital intensive. We use a lot of technology, we use a lot of machinery. Here, it's more about the experience. So it's about that customer contact. And so often we'll find a service business has a lot of labor intensive production rather than capital intensive. Okay, so on this slide, we're going to bring it all together. We're going to be able to compare the manufacturing and the service businesses. So first of all, we're going to look at the differences. Okay, what's different between the two? So hopefully this table, as you can see, we've got those same characteristics we're looking for before, and we're going to apply them to goods, manufacturing goods, and providing services. So these tangible goods that come from a manufacturing output, okay, they're usually tangible. We can see them and touch them. Services are usually intangible. Here's our first difference. If we think about our goods, making the chocolate bar, okay, usually we produce it and consume it separately. We make the chocolate bar, eat it later. Whereas in the airplane flight, we're there at that same time. We're experiencing the services that's been provided to us. If we go to the storability, okay, then our chocolate bar can be easily stored. While the experience on the flight is very hard to put in a bottle and keep. Okay, so it's much more difficult to store a service. The production method in making the chocolate bar can be standardized and mass-produced. Gives us the opportunity to do that because it's a very similar product each time. Whereas the airline flight is customized for that individual. The degree of contact, okay, because the customer isn't really present in that experience, there's minimal customer contact during the production of that good. Whereas in the flight, we're experiencing it right there. The customer is present and there's a high degree of customer contact giving them that service. And finally, then we've got a comparison here where the difference between production technique, often we can use a very capital intensive production line for a manufactured good, whereas looking for services, they're generally more labor intensive. We're using a lot of people to provide that personal customer service. Okay, so on this slide here, we're going to build up the comparison. We've explored already the differences. Now we're going to see what the similarity is between the two. So yes, we'll look to goods. in the manufacturing sense, that we can produce tangible goods. Okay, we can touch the chocolate bar. We produce it and consume it separately. Okay, we can store that chocolate bar. We can standardize and mass produce the Easter bunnies ready for Easter. Okay, we don't need a lot of customers around, and we can use a lot of technology and machinery to produce it. In a service, whether it be Australia Post or an airline like Qantas, it's usually intangible. That experience of flying on the plane or having that letter delivered to you, it's hard to actually touch. Okay, the production and consumption occur simultaneously. As you receive that package, that's when you experience the service. When you receive that flight, that's when you experience it. And therefore, those things are hard to store and bottle up. And it's often very customer focused with a lot of people involved. So it's usually labor intensive. So that's the differences. What do we have in common between the two? Well, if we have to explore the similarities, well, both of them are producing things, okay, for customers. So both of them are going to deal with customers. Both of them deal with raw materials coming in, so we're going to have to deal with suppliers. Both of them will use technology to produce a better good or service, whether it be a chocolate bar or Australia Post could use technology to make it better. Both of them are aiming to produce a high quality output to keep our customers happy and to fulfill the market need of the business. Both of them are going to look for chances to reduce the cost that are involved and reduce the waste. We're trying to be an efficient business. Both of them, whether it's a manufacturing business or whether it's a service business, are trying to be more efficient and achieve our objectives. So we're going to try and reduce waste and reduce costs. So there's still similarities between the two. And we'll explore that in a minute when we look at a question about comparing manufacturing with service together. Okay, so here we have a worked example of that very specific point. If we have to, the question here requires us to compare. Remember the task word for compare, what are the similarities and what are the differences? So we want to make sure we cover both of those. And the marks almost gives away to us that we're probably going to have like a two-way split. 2 marks for the similarities and 2 marks for the differences. What are we comparing? We're comparing the characteristics operations within the manufacturing business. We've talked about that. And they've given us an example such as Cadbury with those of a service business such as Qantas. So we're doing what is similar and different between the two. So my advice to you is to do that and actually separate the similarities from the differences. So our first little mini paragraph comes along here. A manufacturing business such as Cadbury and a service business such as Qantas, so we're alluding back to the case study, both involve the overseeing of operation system, with both operation systems comprising the 3 elements, inputs, process, and outputs, and both producing an output that is sold for money. Okay, so we've got here an example of what's similar between the two. We could have also mentioned they both have customers, they both have technology, a whole range of things. But we've alluded to what's similar. Now we're going to scaffold what is different between the two. So, however, a manufacturing business like Cadbury, which makes a tangible output of chocolate bars, differs from the intangible output as an experience customers have on a flight with Qantas. The outputs of a manufacturing business can be stored, whereas the experience from a service business is usually unable to be stored. Similarly, a chocolate, which is the output from a manufacturing business, can be consumed after production, whereas the experience from a service business is usually consumed during its provision. Okay, so we've got some similarities and differences, and we've scaffolded that nicely. Okay, nice summary here of the manufacturing and service businesses. Okay, so remember again, if an example could be something like a chocolate bar, and here we could have an example of an airline like Qantas and their flight. The chocolate bar is tangible. We can touch it, okay, and it can usually be seen and touched. We produce it in a manufacturing factory or a warehouse or whatever it may be, and we then can consume it later. So that can occur separately. Usually we can store that chocolate bar, okay, until we need it later on. We can standardize it, which means it can be made very similarly time and time again. It's identical, and we can often mass produce it as well. Often it's going to have minimal customer contact. We don't need the customers around when we're producing the chocolate bar. We're going to just deliver it to them at the end. And generally, we can use quite a bit of capital-intensive machinery to produce that chocolate bar because, again, we're producing a standardized product, which is similar time and time again. The difference then from the service side is that usually these are intangible. What you experience on that flight, what you experience at the hotel, is the experience itself. You can't touch that experience, okay? And therefore, usually, you need to be there because the customer's experiencing as it's been delivered to them. So that production and consumption usually occurs simultaneously. And it's usually hard to bottle that service because it's intangible. So usually difficult to store. It's often customized. It's made for that specific individual. High customer contact, and generally going to use a lot of people involved because people are experiencing this service, and it's often labor intensive. So hopefully there you got a nice summary there of the difference between the manufacturing and service businesses producing goods and services from our operations system. What we're going to look at next lesson is technology and how we can use technological strategies to produce goods more efficient and effectively than before.